Well, here's a question that I'd like us to ponder. When nonprofit leaders seek what we would call transformational gifts, what are some, we'll just call it misaligned incentives that could distort clarity for them? Well, that's a question we're going to deal with today. And welcome to Funding the Future Now podcast. My name is Dr. Randy Dirks, and I've been in the nonprofit world as a fundraising executive for about 28 years and love what I do and love the people I work with. Well, today it's my delight to have as our guest Daniel Freeman. And welcome, Daniel, to the show.
Thanks, Randy. Happy to be here.
Great. Well, Daniel is what he calls, and I love this, an executive thought partner for senior leaders. That may be presidents, CEOs, athletic directors, and he's coming alongside them in a variety of ways, but often during moments when the stakes are high. And we're going to chat a little bit about that today. So, Daniel, just glad you're here. And why don't you introduce yourself a little bit to the audience?
Yeah. So thanks, Randy. I am Dr. Dan Freeman. So I've been in the nonprofit space, mostly in higher education, for over a decade now. Started my career in collegiate athletics and then went into collegiate athletics fundraising, academic fundraising. And now I looked back at my career recently and I thought to myself, Randy, what did I love the most about my work? And it was being that thought partner to these executives that we were working with in major and principal gifts. And I thought to myself, how can I turn that into a business where I'm starting and beginning and introducing with my character and ending with my role? But instead of the end of that role being reach, philanthropy, or relationships, I could end it with serving the individuals that I'm working with. And that's where I'm at now. My career evolves and I like to evolve with it. And that's kind of where I am at this point. I love philanthropy. I love the difference that it can make in the populations it can serve and the impact that we can help show others.
Oh, I love that. You know, a thought leader, when you look at people that are in positions of influence, sometimes they can maybe be a little isolated. And so just have somebody from the outside come in, give perspective, and then your focus on serving. That's outstanding. Well, I have a few questions for you. And here's the first one. Leaders in higher education, they're often surrounded by what we would say are brilliant minds.
Yes.
Yet you describe a critical need for politically safe space to think clearly. I love that. So why does this isolation exist at the presidential level, despite all that intelligence that's there? What are your thoughts around that?
You know, Randy, I've realized as I've moved through my career, studied others, mentors, and all these conversations, I've realized that the higher we get, the tougher it is to have awareness of everything that's going on. And a great conversation that I had with someone recently was they said, every week I love to go to the balcony and look down on the stage. And I was like, oh, that's a really great, that's a really great analogy there. And he had made that comment because I was talking about, as a leader, I believe you need to be at that 30,000-foot view. You need to be able to see the forest through the trees. But to be a really in-depth leader, you need to understand how the trees make up the forest, and then how those trees interact with each other to make up that forest, to be able to look for disease in pine trees, to be able to see how to fill in spots, to be able to keep the shade and the cover for the animals below. How does all that work?
Yeah.
Right. So I say that because when you're in that executive level role, it's tough to see all of that. Right. And that's why you have other people on your team to help you with it. But if you don't have the processes and systems in place that allow for the creativity and the proactivity, then you become reactive. And that's where I like to fit in, is that a lot of leaders, because they don't have that space, because they don't have the time, and they don't always feel the trust to speak with those people on their team that report to them because of the issues that could arise from that. If someone says something they're not supposed to, if someone shares something with groups or individuals outside of the work, it can really create an isolating space where you can't pressure test. So I find that when that happens, that's when people become reactive. So I look at my role as saying, let me go in now. Let's create these objective, intellectually stimulating conversations that people tend to need because when they're in this pressure space and they can't test it and they can't talk to people, they lose that creativity and proactivity. They become reactive. And that's
Mhm.
where I come in to hopefully fix that and bring value and allow them to gain that wider view of their work.
I love that, Daniel. The term reactive also connotates for me not a good situation. We'll put it that way.
Yeah.
Because, when people react to a situation, maybe they don't have everything clearly understood. There's some false assumptions in place. And if they don't have somebody to sort of bounce their thoughts off and
Mm,
how they're even thinking about reacting, we can just think of a lot of situations where
yeah.
really great leaders have made a lot of faux pas because of that lack of having the ability to test their assumptions
Mm,
is sort of what I heard you hearing. So what a great asset that is to offer to leaders today.
mhm,
Well, your sociological lens helps you recognize what we'll call hidden incentives and unspoken power structures
mhm.
that shape decisions. I mean, that just
Yeah.
happens all the time. So, when leaders navigate major philanthropic relationships, what are the most common misaligned incentives that could distort reality? In other words,
Mm,
give them a wrong perception of
mm.
what's out there.
Randy, I love that you keep using the word misalignment because
Okay.
in our work, because I'm part of the culture lab and we have a nonprofit mastermind and nonprofit accelerator, we
Yeah.
talk to our members about alignment. We talk about
Okay.
alignment, about invitation, right? Inviting people to join us and making impact and having conversations about how we can make structural change in the areas and the populations we're serving. Now,
Sure.
back to misalignment. Alignment is so important, right? Now, I think something really important when we think about alignment is I'd mentioned it in the first piece of this interview was we have the 3 R's that we talk about, and we keep them really simple. It's reach, revenue, and relationships.
Okay.
So, when we talk about alignment, I have met so many people that go into conversations and immediately when they feel like the person that they're conversing with, and I know we're talking about on a higher level here for leaders in philanthropy, we can use the euphemism of the millionaire next door, right? People go in, you see someone drive up, they don't have the car you expected, they're not wearing the clothes you expected, they may not speak to the degree or the intellect that you had expected. Maybe they're not refined or polished. There are
Sure.
people that will go in and immediately shut themselves down. And they'll be like, this isn't what I expected. This isn't what I want to do. And to the behest of those of us who really take the relationship based work seriously, you can never judge a book by its cover. But that is something that can certainly happen when the time of the leaders, presidents, executive directors that fundraisers are working with and need those leaders to come in for these transformational principal or major gifts. If they see that and they don't understand the breadth of the work that we're doing and the depth of how we approach it, it can come across as, why am I wasting my time with this person? So
Mm.
that's the first faux pas that I have right there. When you
Yeah.
talk about misalignment is these preconceived notions of people we should be working with by the way that they looked and the way that they act. I have certainly in institutions been around people who talk a big game, but have nowhere near the means to actually do it.
For sure.
As you've probably heard, there was an individual who well, it was all over the news, not just philanthropic news, but I think it wasn't North Carolina A&T. I think no, it was Florida A&M University. The individual who promised the huge multi-$100 million gift and the president ended up losing their job because of it. The
Yeah.
vice president of advancement ended up losing their job. And it's from what we know, right? Subjective is that people saw they interpreted who this individual was, and no one
For sure.
ever checked it and backed it up to see if it was actually truthful. So that's the first part. I
Mm.
think the second part is more of a personnel kind of misalignment. Is if you're a leader, executive director, fund president, whatever it may be, and you're going and working in philanthropy with your top fundraiser, that fundraiser should be your expert. And the personnel piece of it that I think is that the job of that top fundraiser or whoever you're with is to make sure that the leader is prepared to be successful,
Mm.
that they're briefed, they're ready to go. Because the goal is, as that top fundraiser, most likely you have created that relationship. You
Right.
understand what the goal is, you understand what the trajectory is, the timeline, right? Which is not always as quick as what leaders would like. They understand the timeline, which means they need to be transparent, communicative, and they need to be strategic with their leader to make sure they understand Where are you at in the conversation? Where is it going to be going? What is the
Mm,
awareness of what you know or what you don't know? We talk about wealth screenings, right? And that
sure.
misalignment can kind of come from w- if we're going to talk about ego, there are obviously some leaders who have that ego and may not trust that top fundraiser to be their
Right.
expert when they need
Exactly.
to. That's a big misalignment to me because if that president is that person who is overseeing that whole institution, whatever it may be, college, university, etc., the same regard should be going for that fundraiser who has built that relationship and is the expert in the work that they do. No one's expecting the president to or the leader to be the expert at everything.
For
So it's
sure.
important that that top fundraiser is treated as the expert in their field. And then the third thing related to the reach revenue and relationships is that the faux pas is when you go into these meetings that it's only for philanthropy. It's
Mm,
only for money. And there's reach revenue relationships, there's time talent treasure. That was one that I had used for a while as well. There is value. There are people, I remember a conversation with a donor when I was in Philadelphia, and this individual had given a $250 gift, and I reached out to thank them and try to bring up conversation as I'd been trying to reach out to them for a while, and they explicitly told me it was a test.
okay.
They certainly I mean, they ended up I had a good relationship with them, but we never actually got to meet in person. All virtual. They ended up
Mm,
giving their first real gift was a $50,000 gift.
oh,
And then they
nice.
ended up doing some significant plan gifts that I had started working on with them and that had closed after I had left. It was a test. And
Mm,
I say that because when we think of those 3 R's, some people have a lot of wealth and they wanna test you to make sure you're gonna be good stewards of it.
for sure.
Sometimes they might not feel comfortable at first and they may say, "I wanna volunteer. I wanna introduce you to someone." They want to see how are you going to interact in their network?
Mhm.
How are you going to treat them even if they're not giving you a certain amount of money? Now that's a whole 'nother story and another thing to talk about as well of how to deal with that and what that looks like, but those are some of the misalignments that I think about.
Yeah. Boy, that's choice. So when's the next book coming out, Daniel?
I've got 2 of them, and I'm working on a leadership book, but man, it is hard to finish, Randy.
Yeah, I'm sure. But yeah, I just want to pick up on a comment you made there. This isn't always the case, but maybe more in academia. Presidents tend to come more from the academic side
Mhm.
and the management side, and they're
Yeah.
good administrators, absolutely. But the issue of connecting with people and
Mhm.
creating a well thought through story and motivating and energizing people, but doing it in a very real, transparent way may not be that president's strength. And so that's where the chief executive fundraising officer, who has likely skills like that, relational, knows how to read the room a little bit
Mhm.
better perhaps than others, if he or she is bringing that president in to really know where is that person's strength, but where are they limited? I know I've heard of stories of presidents that are just not good sitting down with a major donor
Yeah.
and being effective in communicating. So to find out, okay, this guy's good in his numbers or she's great in understanding the academic programs,
Mhm.
let them speak in that circle, but then make sure that that's not dominating the entire conversation. You probably have some stories around that, how
Yeah.
presidents don't necessarily fit well. They have strengths, but you have to know how to manage that whole process.
Yeah, Randy, I've had conversations, been in interviews, read job descriptions. I used to keep job descriptions of roles that I wanted to be in the future, and I would save them to make sure that I was
Mm,
growing and learning in the skills that
yeah,
fit those roles. And a lot of them, and I will say this, a lot of nonprofits, in non-academia, because we know a lot of executive directors in traditional nonprofits, they are not fundraisers and they don't know
yeah,
how to fundraise. They are mission focused and they understand how to connect with the population they're serving, how to do the internal work. But a lot of them don't understand fundraising and don't want to do it. And we found that a lot lately in
okay.
our work. And I say that because I've seen job descriptions where it says they want we'll call it the chief advancement officer. They want the chief advancement officer to be the face
Mm,
of the institution.
okay.
The president or the chancellor, whatever, maybe does not want that. They do not want to be the front facing individual. And that happens, right? We both know that. And that provides a different dynamic that people have to work through in those roles as a fundraising leader or not, as a fundraising middle manager, as a development officer, whatever that may
Yeah,
be, that creates a whole nother set of circumstances to work with.
for sure. Well put. Oh, well, university presidents, nonprofit presidents often operate under extraordinary public scrutiny. Because
Mhm,
you got the board, and then you got the constituents, and you got the larger community.
mhm.
Yet it seems as though their most consequential decisions are often they're made privately. How does your background coaching high performance, in this case, athletes, inform the way you help executives navigate that tension that is there between the high profile, the having to perform, the extraordinary scrutiny, and yet they're often making these decisions on their own, maybe sometimes.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that a lot of my work is informed by my work in athletics. In
Oh,
the being a collegiate athlete, being a younger athlete, and still competing now. And, that's, I was talking to someone about that yesterday. That's 23 years. I think I've been competing and I've been coaching for 15 plus. And
very
I take a lot of that work into, per se, the professional, my career kind of career work. And what I like to do is when I coach in athletics, I always tell my athletes, this is the model I'm going to teach you. And then once you understand it, then we're going to individualize it for you because everyone's different. But
Mhm.
just like in a lot of our work, especially in fundraising, there are tenets that you just need to understand. You need to understand how to have a conversation. You need to learn about annual gifts, major gifts, planned gifts, principal gifts. You need to events. You need to understand how all of that ties into stewardship, right? Into
Right.
cultivation, into closing the gift. So I take a lot of that in that model and that individualization. I take that into the work that I do with executives and leaders. And to your point, they are operating in a funnel, right? We
Yeah.
know that there are great leaders that just have yes people under them. And
Mhm.
when there are yes people under them, it turns into a vacuum. Nothing's challenged, nothing's changed. And then when decisions go awry, there grows more pressure
For sure.
because people don't understand why, because everyone agreed with it. And then
Exactly.
and then the next step is, well, sadly, who do you blame? Whose
True.
fault is it if everyone thought the same thing and no one was telling the truth to the
Mm.
leader? So the I like to look for this goes to the sociological side again, right? I like to look for the underlying reasons for things to happen. When I coach in track and field, and when I was a strength coach as well, I learned very early on in my exercise physiology classes that the point of issue is never actually where the issue is occurring. So
Okay.
if someone was feeling back pain, sometimes that could be from their glutes being really tight. That could be from their glutes not activating. That could be from their
Mhm.
hamstrings being too tight. If they're pulling a hamstring while they're doing sprinting drills, it's because the work they're doing is not putting their hamstring through the same length of movement. So then when they sprint and they lengthen their hamstring beyond what they've trained, the
Right.
hamstring snaps back and it guards itself because it says, "Oh, well, you're going too far."
For
So
sure.
I take that into a lot of the work that I do in the decision work, where when I'm thinking of an example was I had this a conversation with the president, and we were talking about development role and things going on, and they were sharing with me that their VP they had let them go because they weren't performing, and they
Mm.
wanted to transition the role to a university relations role, VP for university relations, so marketing, communication, and development.
I
And
see.
I've seen places doing that. It's a little bit of a money saver. It's very tough to find someone that can actually do all
For
of
sure.
those things or
Yeah.
have that experience, right? You know that. And in that conversation, it was supposed to be 30 minutes and we went over an hour. And he
Wow.
probably went on for 20 minutes talking about, why he wanted to change it and what it was looking like and the background and this, that, and the other. And he kind of paused and he said to me, "I don't know why I'm telling you this." And I
Mm.
was like, "No, no, no, keep going. Like this is great." And that's how a lot of my conversations are, is I really think hard, and I think the phrase that I like to use is, "I'm listening for the next answer, not for the next question."
Okay.
And when we're having that conversation, he was saying that to me, and we got towards the end of it, and he had made that comment to me, and I said, "Do you have anyone to talk to?" And he was like, "No." I said, "What about, your peers in your athletic conference?" He's like, "Well, yeah, they could be a few hours away, but post-COVID, not everyone local is staying here anymore. So they're going to competitors. So I don't want my peer at another institution, even if I like them. I don't want them to capitalize that on the work that they're doing and try to attract students because of issues that we're having. And they know that they can, they have a solution for that problem. And
Sure.
then, his leadership team was fine. But like we talked about earlier, let's say that you tell someone adjacent to your work, another peer. Well, what if that peer tells someone that's adjacent to your team and that gets to your team? What if you
Sure.
tell your chief of staff or your CMO and then that person shares what was supposed to be confidential with their team? Does that affect productivity? Does it affect efficiency? Does it lower morale? Do people
Awesome.
leave? Right? And there's this sense of there could really be a snowball effect. And
Yes.
that was one of those proof of concept conversations for me where it's the questions that I ask that look for the underlying reason. It's never about why are you telling me? It's about don't you have someone else to speak with? And if not,
Yeah.
why don't you have someone else to speak with? And if you don't have someone else to speak with, what's the solution so that you don't have to sit here in this pressure by yourself? Because if the goal is to make a decision quickly and you're the only person making it, and all the pressure's on you, how are you supposed to talk that out and work through that to look for the solution? And that's a lot of the things that we see are, Randy, when you can bring in intellectually stimulating conversation, it allows
Mhm.
people to think outside of themselves because it's stimulating. And that normally doesn't happen within an institution, within a team. It usually happens external because you have different views and awareness of a situation. So bringing in those intellectually stimulating conversations allows the growth of the awareness of the client that I'm working with so they can see things through another lens. And then we can start to bring in processes and systems that allow them, as we said before, right, to be creative and to be proactive versus being reactive because they're the only ones making that decision. And it being from an external source really brings in that objective view of I'm sitting next to you as a partner, helping you reflect and challenge the thoughts that you have so you can have a higher level awareness in making your decisions and making them quicker because it's not just you who's making.
Yeah. So good. And it really segues into our last question. You noted things are moving pretty fast in
Mhm.
our world today. So many vectors coming in,
Yeah.
situations. And because of that, that can cause problems in the quickness of decisions that then have to be
Yes.
made. So you talk about slowing down when the
Mhm.
institution demands speed.
Mhm.
So that's very interesting. So you help leaders slow down and they've got complex decisions, but you help them move forward with clarity. I like this rather than urgency. All right, in higher education, urgency just seems to be a part of the structure, you know? It's got to happen and it's got to happen now. We've got these goals to meet, these campaigns.
Yeah.
So how do you help a president or maybe a chief advancement officer create what you call space to slow down when the institution calendar seems designed to boy, we gotta make these decisions and we gotta get these outcomes. That's a very interesting balance. I'd love for you to explore that with us.
Yeah, you said something that I loved, Randy, and I was like, he's queuing me up here. You said urgency, and
Yeah.
I equate it to when I coach. There's a difference between quickness and being fast. There's a difference between quickness and speed.
Wow.
Quickness is how you can do the performance in a certain space, right? And speed is how fast you can go from point A to point B. So I look at we want leaders to make quick decisions, not fast decisions, because quick
Mm,
decisions can definitely be more thoughtful. It's not about the speed at which you do it. So it's about the efficiency. That's how it ties to that quickness. So you had mentioned urgency, and
mhm.
urgency to me is react, right? So everyone's saying it there, and you're right though. People want quick decision, not quick. People, there's always this urgency to do
Yeah.
everything and get it done at once. And the way I look at it is we talk about, I'm going to go right back to it. We talk about being proactive and being creative. When people are
Mhm.
being urgent, they're being reactive. And if people are being reactive, to me, that says they don't have the processes and systems in place to have seen this coming in the first place. And if your team is allowed to have the creativity and proactivity within the systems and processes that your institution or, say, your leadership team has created, they should be able to look ahead. But if everyone is always trying to be reactive and everything seems urgent, and that's the key word there, if everything seems urgent, you're missing those systems and processes that allow people to be proactive and
Mhm.
creative in the solutions that they're doing. We know Higher ed is always changing, but we also know there are always tenants. You need people in your departments, especially the leaders, that can look at what they're doing as leaders and say, this is what I see coming. This is how we're going to be proactive to get that. And my view is the people who report to those leaders, they're the ones most of the time that are doing all of this hard work. They're the ones
Right.
that are activating everything.
Hmm.
And if that's the case, your leader should be able to proactively create strategy for what's coming next while the employees are working on actively assessing and solving the problems.
Well, that's excellent. I'm just picking up. Obviously, we're bouncing off these ideas of urgency and reactive, but the ability to come alongside people in spite of the speed of which things are happening, and you've alluded to that, and give a process or a system as you've spoken to,
Mhm.
so that I really think if you have that system in place, you can slow down and then you can make some thoughtful decisions in spite of the pace
Mm.
that is out there. Well put. Well, I've got some, I call them the fast five at the
Yeah.
end. They have nothing to do with sociology, nothing to do with structures as
Yeah.
well as you've documented, but more to
Mhm.
do with you as a person. So here's question number one. What's a great piece, maybe even the best piece of professional advice you've ever received?
If someone has made up their mind, they're not going to change it, and there's nothing you can do about that except radically accept it.
Well put. Question number two. What's a daily habit you cannot live without?
I live on my calendar, not a
Okay.
physical calendar. My online calendar, if you look at it, I put in my tasks. I set aside time every day for different things that I need to get done
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
also the meetings. I live on that calendar and schedule out 1 to 2 weeks in advance.
Yeah, so well put. Well, imagine if you could go back to your 20-year-old self, that college student. What would be, now that you've gone through life more,
Mhm.
what would be a bit of advice you'd give to that younger man?
I think it would probably be present in everything that you're doing and accept the fact that you cannot control the outcomes that you want. You have to be able to adapt around the situations that you're in and find the best in those situations and find ways to succeed and thrive within them. And I want to give a quick plug. There's a book from David Epstein that's coming out soon, and it essentially talks about how living in the constraints within a box can help you grow exponentially outside of the box.
Fascinating. The you mentioned about being present. There could be a whole podcast about that because I think when leaders really are present with other people, those other people know they're valued, they're
Yep.
important.
Mhm.
And in the donor world, trust and being appreciated and being valued and knowing, feeling, sensing
Mhm.
that that person across the table is really in tune with who I am.
Mhm.
Boy, that's very powerful. Well, the next question's gonna dig a little deeper, and I want you to think of a failure, not necessarily an epic failure, but as you went through that experience, how did it actually set you up for success? What was that like?
You know, I actually just wrote about this. It's either in a LinkedIn post or it's gonna come out.
Okay.
Uh, in a recent role, I was really the only fundraiser, and I was doing events and stewardship and everything else, and I had to put together a golf event that was 10 days after the largest event that we had ever held, and it was an
Oh,
inaugural event.
yeah.
Ton of crossover, this and that. I had it down pat, and I felt comfortable with it,
Yeah.
and you're gonna laugh at this. There was a faux pas, and the faux pas was I had set the budget, we had set the quote for the food, the event was great, it was hot, but people loved it. I had told them I wanted kebabs, and they were made fresh, on the course, and people loved them. And they had said, "Oh, we can do 4 different types of kebabs." And I said, "Great, let's do 4, let's do the 90." And they confirmed with me before, and they were like, "Okay, so you want 4 different types of kebabs?" And I was like, "Yes." So I got the bill back, and they had done enough kebabs for 90 people for every type of kebab,
Of course.
which almost tripled the price that we had to
Yes.
pay. And because of that, the event barely broke even. And me, that was, I kept trying to look on the bright side and understand that it was a failure. But Randy, it helped me understand. Now that was a jump in, that was a quick thing. The scheduling, 10 days after was not ideal. But for the following year, I was planning 9, 10 months ahead of time. I had
Mhm.
created a committee and I had identified who was going to help me at the location for the event, who was going to oversee the food at that event so that I had a
Mhm.
different pair of eyes that were aware and more
Oh,
focused
that's
on it
good.
than myself. And it was also, how am I going to create a memorable event while being even more efficient with our funds because of the previous year?
Sure.
It was barely break even. So it was really setting up the processes and systems so I could be creative on everything else and have other
Yeah.
people help me make this a great event.
Well, thank you for sharing that. A last question is, where's your favorite place on earth to disconnect and recharge?
Definitely the Netherlands and definitely Utrecht. Uh,
Okay.
Went there with my doctoral program to the Netherlands and went to Utrecht with my wife on our honeymoon. And that's what's on my LinkedIn cover photo. Someone had asked me that yesterday. I love the Netherlands, love Utrecht, and that is a place where I will put my phone down and you will not hear from me if I don't want you to.
Well, it's great to have those spots, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Well, Daniel, what a delight to have you on the podcast today. You brought a very rich dimension because you have that athletic training background. You've been an athlete yourself. You've been in the fundraising world. You're now in the coaching world. So you've got all these spheres
Mhm.
that come together, and you're seeing so much in a comprehensive way, but you're also able to develop, as you noted before, systems and structures and processes. So good to have you. Well, I would just love for you to share with the audience ways they can connect with you. Obviously, there's things that you can offer as value to others. So just take a moment and share about that.
Yeah, thanks, Randy. So you can go to fundraisewithdan.com. That is the actual website. And you can look at the nonprofit accelerator that we do. You can
Okay.
also book some time to talk with me about the executive thought partner if you're curious about it. My
Yes.
LinkedIn, you can look me up, but it's the slash on my LinkedIn is Dan the EDD man. So you can look that up too for people who want to find me on LinkedIn. I'm always writing content and I've started a Substack. And then the last thing is, if anyone is listening to this podcast and has a question or wants to talk with me, I'd love to share with you. I have a new little ebook purposely for this use that I'd love to share with people, and one that also has some notes about the system that I'm working on and the processes that I've created. So if you're listening to this podcast, you're interested in talking, or you'd like to see that book, reach out and let me know, and I'd love to share it with you.
Oh, so good. Thanks for the resources you're giving back. That's exceptional. Well, to the audience, just want to thank you for tuning into this podcast. And we deliver these regularly on Spotify and YouTube. And so this is Funding Your Future Now podcast. And my name is Dr. Randy Dirks. So thank you for being with us. And we invite you back in the future. Bye for now.